This is Rachel Rehart, and we're doing a quick module on color balance. This is an interesting little tool because it can be used in a nice, kind of clean, simple way, but it also can be used to add some fun, interesting color to an image too. So I'm kind of excited about this because I think a lot of people don't use color balance very often. I think they look at it and think, I'm a little nervous of this tool. So here it is. It looks like some scales. So let's click it open. Okay, now the first thing I want you to notice is it opens to midtones. That's usually what it defaults to. You can also work on shadows and highlights. So let's just kind of take a look at this. As we've talked about in other modules, when we're looking at working with color, usually we're looking at balancing or working with opposites in color. And this is a fabulous visual demonstration of that. You have a continuum that equals to kind of a gray, almost a no tone in the middle. As you notice, it becomes grayish in these tones. But here we have red, green, blue. Do you know what that is? RGB, right? We've heard RGB before, haven't we? And here we have CMY. So CMY, like CMYK, red and cyan balance, green, magenta balance, blue, yellow, they balance. So when they're at the middle, that's the point where it's kind of a gray point. So I'm going to show you first of all how we can take this and say, let's just kind of warm this image. Let's use this basically. So let's look at this. There's skin tones here. We're going to say, I want to come in and I feel like maybe it's a little bit cool. So in the skin tones, I'm going to bring up some red. And I already feel like I really like that better. Adding some red. I feel like we kind of went from a little bit of a grayish, maybe even almost slightly greenish. It's that cyan that was kind of infusing the image. If you look at his grays in his jacket, it's got more of that greenish tone, and we kind of warmed it up. It becomes a little cleaner. The same thing goes for her dress. It's a little bit duller. It's got more of the blues and things. So we brought this in, we were balancing it out. And I might even add just a pop of yellow, just a pop. I don't want to make their skin too orangey or anything. I can also brighten this up. I could brighten this up by using curves or something because their skin tones are a little bit in the shadow because of how it's been shot. But as you can see, we've brought a more lively look to their skin tones using midtones because that tends to affect skin and these type of areas a little bit more, but it didn't really mess too much, didn't change the shadows a whole lot. Now I could go in and say, I want to warm up shadows because, I want them to be clean. Just a pop. You have to be careful with the yellow because it can kind of get like a weird greeny tone, especially if you don't pair it with red. So here, this image has just become sort of a warmer overall image. I might even come in and say, I feel like her dress, if I came into the highlights, I could warm the dress just a pop, just a smidge. And there we have, what's become a warmer toned image. So that's a clean edit using this. But the thing is, what I want to point out here, I'm sorry, I turned off the opacity. What I want to point out here is really color balance often isn't really about being the clean edit. It's an interesting little tool because it can help you get a little bit more artistic really, really quick. So let me kind of show you how that works. So there is a concept in design, and this is kind of a popular concept that's been going around, the idea of cool shadows and warm highlights. That sort of juxtaposition creates visual interest and draws you into an image. So I might go into the shadows and say, rather than adding blue and red, I may just pull it down and add a bit of those purpley tones. Do you see? I'm going to add these purpley tones. I'm going to add maybe even just a pop of magenta. And then I may come into the highlights because warm highlights, giving it a little bit more of that boost. Do you see? We've given it some of that. And coming in and making sure that the midtones are, they're sufficiently warm, I feel. But you see like what an interesting image we have now. It's got this warm, almost romantic look. If we want to take it even a little further, some of the look sometimes is adding a little bit of that magenta tone to the midtones. It gives it a little bit of that romantic storybook type of coloring and tone and feel. That's not always something that I go for, but adding just that pinch of magenta in there, as long as you make sure that you sufficiently warm it, you can kind of give yourself this tonality that brings an interest to the image. So this warm shadows, cool highlights. So you can really look at almost anything that you've got going and you can say in a certain image, is that something that I want to address with color balance? Let's look at this image. I think it's been shot in this greenery. And so as you can see, there's kind of almost a greenish feeling to this image. So let's try to balance this one a little bit cleanly and then maybe add a little bit of an interesting thing. So, okay, here we are in here. I think I'm almost going to start. I don't usually start by adding magenta, but do you see, I kind of wanted to clean up that slight feeling of them being almost a little greenish, a little underwater feeling. I wanted to bring some warmth and some depth to their skin again and separate them from their background here. So now they have more true to life skin tone just by balancing a bit of that excess green, because the light was green coming through these trees, these leaves. It kind of gave a little bit of a, and so now like look at how you got the whites, they're looking much whiter. You've got good whites even up in the shadows. They're very clean all the way up in here. There's no greenness in there. Her hair has good tone, no greening. They just pop better. So, I could come in and right there, I feel like it really fixes it a lot, but it didn't mess around with the greens too much. Do you notice my greens stay for the most part pretty deep, pretty nice. And I could even come in here to the shadows and say, yeah, I want to add just a pinch of the green back, perhaps just a little bit of the green back. And in the highlights, maybe I say, in this areas of their skin, we'll make sure there's a pinch of that magenta, just a little bit of the red, a little bit of the yellow, just a pinch, just enough that now look, they're somewhat separated from where they were. They have a little more pop, a little less green. So that's just a simple cleaning. And honestly, if I didn't add the green here, you'd have a very different look. But again, still very clean. So this is just one way to quickly target if you're like, oh, I've got green in the image, I've got things going on that I just don't love. Okay, but now let's talk about making those shadows kind of cool. Again, remember how we talked about that? Just a pinch. I don't really add cyan in the shadows, just a pinch of that blue. And we've got the highlights that are a little bit warm. They've got the magenta. We've got the reds. We've got these warmer highlights. And you see that just adds a little bit more drama. I've already got the magenta in these tones. I could possibly give a little bit more yellow, pardon me, too much red there, just a pinch there. And as you see, we can quickly say, it's a little bit more of, a little bit more artistic, and that these green, the greens have a little bit of the blues and the purpley hints in them. And you could add some magenta possibly in there. I hesitate because they're in the shadow a bit because their face is a little bit darker. But as you see, do you see how quickly I can balance these different tones? I can turn this down and immediately I feel what takes kind of a greenish, slightly less interesting, because if you see, you can especially see it in her hair. It doesn't have that lovely kind of warmth that her hair had, that warm brown. And it's just very easy to find where you need to pull things back. You can sort of work your way into it without getting too crazy. So color balance is just spectacular. I feel like it's something that isn't often used a lot. Curves, levels, they get a lot of the love. They get a lot of the excitement. And this is just a spectacularly interesting tool that gives you a lot of control over your image because you have so many options, adding, subtracting each color in each different part of the image. You have shadows, midtones, highlights, and it gives you infinite control in those. So this is something I would definitely say Get in there and play around, mess around, see what you've got, see what you can bring out of an image at any given time. There's always something interesting. This image is a little bit brighter, so I wanted to kind of show you how this could work because it's also, again, see, it's a little bit cool. So let's bring up our color balance. Again, the midtones, as you can see, we can just quickly take away a little bit of that cyan. It was just a little bit of a cool image. And watch especially the tones of his vest, or his jacket, I suppose. It turns it back to that correct color. So as you can see, just right there, bang, it's a very quick, simple type of adjustment to add a little bit of warming. But again, you know, do you want to come in and cool those highlights? I mean, look at that. That's a totally different image right there. Just totally different, bringing in a little bit of the blue in the shadows. If we want to come into the highlights and warm those a pinch, actually, I think I don't need the red in the highlights because the highlights go a little crazy on this one, but I may add a little bit of yellow because look, in her dress, we're just going to kind of make sure that it stays kind of that little bit slightly warm, not too cool. We may come in possibly in the midtones. We could add just a titch of that magenta. And look, suddenly, do you see just the difference? Do you see the depth that you can quickly bring and the visual interest by having those shadows that are a little bit cooler? It brings in that interest in those trees back there. And yet their skin tones are still nice. They're still clean. They still have a good look about them. And the highlights are warm and clean and inviting. So fun tool. I recommend it. Get in there, play around, see what you can come up with using color balance.